My name is Andrey Terentyev. I am one of the few Russians who had a long time experience with Tibetan people, and I was particularly lucky because I was a kind of personal translator for His Holiness the Dalai Lama in all his visits to Russia and in some visits of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to other countries like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. And these 2 years, 1991, 92, 2 visits of His Holiness, this was the top time of my life, the peak of my life, because the Dalai Lama traveled over Russia almost a month, 1991, and almost a month, 1992. And I was following him everywhere. I was to sit with him in the car, I was to sit by him in the plane, because he might need something, and I should translate it into Russian. And it was unbelievable experience and unbelievable opportunity for me to know the personality of the Dalai Lama. First, when he came, I took a small tape recorder with me, and I was going to properly record whatever possible and to write in my notebook, but it was not possible, because I was translate from morning till night, not only for the Dalai Lama, but for the whole retinue, because there were many questions to be solved about food, about transport, about lodging, many things, and I was doing all this job for the whole team of the Dalai Lama. And the first meetings were in Moscow. Then we traveled to Buriatia and to Kalmykia in the first year. The happiness of people who saw the Dalai Lama was unbelievable. There were crowds, and I was very much afraid for his security, because thousands of people were moving to and fro, and police couldn't do anything. So only when they placed the Dalai Lama in the car, it was a safe place. But not only his big speeches and initiations of Avalokiteshvara, which he gave in Buriatia and Kalmykia, were important. Also, lots of private interviews. And there were different people coming out, saying different things. So the Dalai Lama often asked my comments on what's going on. And you see, I was in quite a unique situation in this respect, because on one side, I was working at the Museum of History of Religion and Atheism. It was an official government institution, the leading place for the scientific atheism and criticism of religion. So I knew whatever was going on in the country from this side. From the other side, I was a member of the Buddhist underground, so I knew the opposite side. And generally, I had a doctorship from St. Petersburg University, so I knew the literature, I knew what was going on, and many other things. So, in most cases, I could help a little bit to His Holiness to realize where this person who he was talking to is saying proper thing, or it's not quite exact. When I was translating for His Holiness, I could do it in different way. When I saw that the person is saying good, true things, I was internally translating with emotion and trying to pass the whole meaning of his speech to His Holiness. When there was some party leader or a person who is a little bit crazy or something like that, I was translating mechanically, just without emotion, and so His Holiness could understand that I do not share the view. So there were many subtleties in this respect. And different people were coming to see him. One claimed that he is a relative of the Russian Tsar, and now he is organizing the Russian Empire. So he was brought, so he asked some advice. One person who wanted me to help him to talk to the Dalai Lama said that he is Jesus Christ, who came for the second time. And you know, I am not a saint, I cannot judge whether he is crazy or whatever. So I said to the Dalai Lama that there is a person who is claiming that he is Jesus Christ and he needs your help. His Holiness didn't respond. And later he said that if he really were Jesus Christ, that he could help me, not me could help him. And so in some cases, his silence was the answer to the questions of people. Then there was interesting experience, because when His Holiness was coming to communist party institution, for example, to the Parliament of Kalmyk Republic. He was received in Kalmykia on the top level. And it was just unbelievable, like people reacted. You know, in Kalmykia, when the airplane landed, the Dalai Lama was taken straight to the stadium where about 20,000 people were waiting for him. And the carpet was from the airplane to the, from his car, he was brought into the car to the stadium, for maybe around 200 meters. Whatever step he made, the roses were thrown to his feet. So he was, and me too, because I was going by, we walked on the roses. Just unbelievable. And when later he talked to the Kalmyk parliament, first, you know, people felt very shy. They didn't know how could they speak to such a person like the Dalai Lama. But he, very clever, asked, what about your harvest in this year in your republic? What about your cattle breeding? So he gave some questions which made them to land on the reality, and they felt easier, and the talk was very interesting. And by that time, you know, the Chinese government were sending special notes to the Foreign Office of Soviet Union, to Kalmykia, and to Buriatia. But on this sitting of parliament, the chairman just read loudly this Chinese note, and people were laughing at each phrase, and they just threw it away. The country was free, and the whole situation was just wonderful freedom, because after the communist time, we felt the air of freedom at last. So we were not afraid. Unbelievable. Also, it was interesting to know that in the private interviews I can mention that the ministers of police and of KGB, that is secret police, also asked an audience with His Holiness, and they confessed for the untrue things which we were doing. I was translating, you know. So they too confessed that they were mistreating Buddhism and were doing wrong things in their life. So His Holiness said, of course, the situation was difficult. It's nice that you confess what we were doing. Okay, so they could go. But the minister of KGB, he was 100% sure that I'm also a member of KGB, because as a translator of the Dalai Lama, KGB is everywhere. They were thought that I was placed there with the help of KGB. And when I was walking around the capital of Elista, he sent a special security with me that he would take care and like that. His Holiness made wonderful teachings there on the 3 roots of the path, including Prajna Paramita. And I was translating from the English translating of Thaktorla. Thaktorla was sitting by His Holiness and translating simultaneously into English, and I was translating from the English language into the Russian language. So Kalmykia was a wonderful experience. Then in Buriatia at that time also there was a huge stadium with thousands of people where the Dalai Lama gave teaching. But that teaching was translated by someone. Buryat invited another translator from Moscow, and we were just standing nearby, helping him sometimes when he didn't know terminology. There, the Buryat Lamas showed to His Holiness the new institution for education, which they just established. We visited this institution. The Dalai Lama blessed it, because he always was stressing the importance of education in Buddhism. Also, in Buryatia, he tried to improve the Tuva, Vinaya, because in Mongolian areas there is a problem that some people who wear monk robes are not monks in reality. They, on daytime they go to the temple, and at night they go to their families and their homes. So His Holiness strongly commented that if you are layman, you should not wear monk robes. Also, he visited many places where were the ruins of destroyed monasteries, because in Buryatia there were about 40 big monasteries, which most of them were ruined, and some were a little bit restored and reopened by that time. So in particular he visited Gusinozersky Datsan, which was the head monastery of Buryatia. And also he gave a lecture at university in Ulan-Ude, capital of Buryat Republic. I was translating this lecture, and then the students were allowed to ask questions. And the last questions were about reincarnation. So His Holiness was quite excited to answer these questions. He liked that students are so interested in important things. And then when we came to the car and drove to a residence, which was some distance from the city, His Holiness asked me, there was an interesting talk I want to tell. He asked me, and you, Andrey, do you difficulties with believing in reincarnation? I answered that when I was starting to study Buddhism, I had difficulty to believe in reincarnation. But finally I decided that whether incarnation exists or it doesn't exist, there is no better philosophy than Buddhist philosophy, with compassion and wisdom on the first plane. And His Holiness said, right, I also think so. He said that some people wouldn't agree with me, but I have such consideration. See, for example, we have 4 major Buddhist philosophical schools, like true lower and true higher. And we consider that to reach the Buddhahood, you can only with Prasangika Madhyamaka. But if you can look at Sautrantika or Vaibhashika, these schools do not have this developed view of emptiness which we have in higher schools. So the difference between the views of these schools and Madhyamika Prasangika is far more important than difficult than the question about the existence of reincarnation. Because if reincarnation exists or not, that's a problem of relative truth level. And when we talk about the emptiness, we come about the reality level. The difference is far more important. But nobody can say that Vaibhashika and Sautrantika are not Buddhist. Therefore, I think that you can be Buddhist not believing in reincarnation. He said, many people wouldn't agree with me, but that's my view. I was very much impressed with this and remember details of this talk up to now. Also, in Buriatia there were many other meetings. His Holiness talked to the people in the theater, and there was a telephone call that you have a bomb in the theater. So we were to evacuate His Holiness from the hall. Many other interesting things happened. And the next year, His Holiness visited Russia again at the end of summer. Actually, his visit was planned to the beginning of summer, but the political situation in the Soviet Union became dangerous. And I wrote a letter and found that it's better to postpone visit. And it was correct because we had a coup, military coup. So the communists tried to put the country on the old rails. The coup was lost, but tanks were in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and there were some clashes, some people died, and His Holiness came after that. He was very happy to see that that people were not doing the military resistance, but it was peaceful resistance to the coup. They came with flowers to tanks and put flowers in the tanks. And His Holiness especially came to the place where 3 persons died, were killed by the tank, and placed kata there. Also, he wanted to visit. There was, in Soviet Union there was a very famous Russian dissident thinker, Andrey Sakharov. He was an academician, he was the author of the Russian nuclear weapon. Then he became the main fighter for human rights. He was persecuted also in Russia, exiled from Moscow to some other place. But when the Soviet Union fell apart, he was elected into the parliament, but unfortunately, very soon he died because he was an elderly person already. So His Holiness was very fond of his activities, and we came to visit the widow of Sakharov, who lived in Moscow, Elena Bonner. When we were in the elevator going to her, His Holiness said, "Oh, I forgot the kata." He said, "Do you have kata?" I had a kata. He said, "Can Dalai Lama borrow kata from you?" I took my kata, but he said, "Oh, that's a small one. It wouldn't fit." And sent somebody to bring a good kata. So, in memory of Sakharov, the great fighter for human rights in the Soviet Union, he gave this kata to his widow. We had a tea there, and she presented him his works published already, and we left. Then, during the second visit in 1992, he, for the first time, visited not only Buriatia and Kalmykia, but also Tuva Republic. This is the third place of ethnic Buddhism in Russia. And they were 4 miles from the airport to the capital country, to the capital of the republic. And you can imagine that on the 4 miles, people were standing on the knees, greeting the car with His Holiness, because they were robbed of religion. By that time, all the lamas were dead already, and only one elderly person, former monk, was brought to see the Dalai Lama, the last one who was there. In Tuva, the Dalai Lama also spoke at the big square to the people, and this was also a dangerous place because the crowd was not controllable. And also we came to see the place of the biggest monastery of Tuva, which was totally destroyed, but some remains of walls, these thick walls made of clay, were still there. And when we went by helicopter, and when the helicopter was approaching, the Dalai Lama had some vision. I was sitting by him, so he told me that, I hear the monk reciting the Diamond Sutra. When we landed, we were taken to the a kind of local museum of Buddhism, because they didn't have temples, they had just a sort of museum with remains. And the first thing which was given to the Dalai Lama was Diamond Sutra. And he said, showed me, see. Tuva had the worst experience under the communism, totally destroyed. And when I tried to find out how it happened, because Tuva was virtually independent, and I was told that the Buddhism was destroyed not by Russians, but by Tuvinians themselves. Some lamas were rich and were hated by people, and the young people who were victims of communist propaganda destroyed it by themselves. But of course, many lamas were arrested and sent to the concentration camps into the Soviet Union. I visited Tuva before that several times. I was asked to take part in making the catalogue of Tibetan wood blocks and manuscripts in local museum. For 2 or 3 years I worked there. And I was fortunate to see 2 last educated lamas who were there. But when His Holiness came, they were not there already, unfortunately. And in 1992, it also happened that the Dalai Lama went to Buriatia and he visited not only Buriatia, but also the autonomous area of Buriatia, which is nearby. You know, during the Soviet Union, Buriatia was divided into parts in a similar way like Tibet was divided into parts under Chinese communists. Chinese followed our example. So one big area near the city of Chita to the east was cut of Buriatia and called the Buryat Autonomous Area. But it had the biggest monasteries with about 1,000 monks in each, Aginsky Datsan and Sugulsky Datsan. And my teacher was, that time, he became an abbot of Sugulsky Dansad, which was to be restored. And I was most happy when we landed near the monastery with the Dalai Lama, and the old lamas of this monastery, whom were my good friends and my teacher, and I was coming with the Dalai Lama to introduce them. It was also a so unbelievably happy moment. The Dalai Lama stayed there for a week, and he also visited the main pilgrimage place in Buryatia. There was some mountains and forest, and there one mountain called Alkanai. For more than 100 of years, it was considered a hidden land of Denchok. And there were many springs, some chortens. The main chorten was blown up by communists 3 times, but believers rebuilt it again in the forest. They couldn't be caught. So we came that time, and I was instructed by my teacher what to tell to His Holiness about the sacred places of this area. So I was like a guide on my own country. I was also very happy at that time to show it to me. Walking in the forest was also very interesting with the Dalai Lama. For example, he said that there was some worm on the tree. He said, you know, I'm a little bit afraid of worms. Maybe it has something with my karma. So, and such things. There he was making a big purification of land ritual. We all read some text, and this was very important. Later, when he stayed in the Aginsky area, he also saw the exploded chorten, which was the biggest chorten in Buryatia, I think. But only the hill was there. So it was very sad for His Holiness to see this hill, and I told him the story about it. But after 10 years, this church tent was restored and rebuilt. So when I came to Dharamsala later, I was happy to show it to His Holiness. He was very happy to see that it's going on, the restoration of Dharma in Soviet Union. But when he was there, what he saw with his own eyes was the results of total destruction. Therefore, I was very much surprised when after a year, 1993, I read that in some interview in Canada, His Holiness said that he believes that Russia will become one of strongholds of Buddhism. After all this picture of total destruction, how could it be? Next year, he again came to Moscow, the Dalai Lama, and asked him, "Did you really say that?" He said, "Yes, I think so. I think that you have a good future for Buddhism." I was very much encouraged by his words. Also, when he came here, no, it was 1991 when he came, he also recommended me that you should make a Buddhist journal in Russian. And we organized the first Buddhist journal and Buddhist publishing house. Buddhist publishing house was called Nartang because actually it was a branch of Nartang publications of international office with Lodi Gyari, like a branch, because otherwise you couldn't register a publishing house in Russia at that time. The communist legislation didn't give any possibility to publish. So we pretended we were a branch of Tibetan publishing house, and we started, and we published the first book in Russian of the Dalai Lama called Buddhism of Tibet, where we collected not only his famous short text on books of Tibet, but also his Nobel Prize talk and something other. At that time, before, we didn't have any Buddhist literature in Russia during the Soviet time. And this we published again with the help of Tibetans, because Tibetans gave us the paper. There was no paper to publish on. Lodi Gyari gave us the paper, and we borrowed some money, I don't remember where. And we published 80,000 copies. So this book was sold immediately. Also, in Russia by that time, we first heard, many people heard the talks about the Tibetan situation. When Lodi Gyari came to St. Petersburg in 1989, for the first time we came with Tibetan flag into the big democratic meeting, and people were asking, what is this flag, what it means, and we explained about the Tibet situation. Oh, but I think I talked too long about the first question, about the visits of His Holiness. Later, after the visit of 1994, it became difficult for him to visit because of Chinese pressure. The Chinese pressure became stronger, and the Russian government was reluctant to allow the visits of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And there was only one exception in 2003 when he came to consecrate the main temple in Kalmykia. He came just for 2 days there. Since that time, we only are praying and asking that His Holiness should come. At the end of 1990, I even applied to court against the government that they do not give visa to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But the court said, please show us the document that we rejected. But they were just oral negotiations, no documents, so we couldn't do anything. But people still have hope, because many thousands of believers, I think we have from 500,000 to 1 million of Buddhist believers all over the Russia, including not only Buddhist areas, ethnic Buddhist areas, but also Russians in other places. Not so many people have money to travel to India or to other places to see His Holiness. So it would be very fortunate, very important for them if someday His Holiness could visit, of course.